Hi, I'm Li Hao. Today I'm going to answer an hypothetical question. What happens if Svelte does not have a feature called Svelte Actions? Why do I ask this question? Well, because to me, in my opinion, the best way to understand what a feature is, how this feature works, is to think about what if there is no such feature, right? So there will be most likely two outcomes, right? One is that you can't do anything at all. So which means that this feature is necessary, is essential to help you to achieve something. Without it, it's impossible. A different outcome would be you can still do what you want, but probably it will be slightly harder to achieve what you want. Maybe when you want to write code, it will be more complex, more boilerplate code, or maybe you have to do a roundabout way in order to achieve something, right? So which means that this kind of feature actually does not change the essential of like ability or possibility of doing something, but it actually helps you to accomplish something in a much simpler or easier way, right? So what about Svelte Actions? Is it like an enabler, enabling you to accomplish something that is not previously possible? Or it's like a facilitator, like allows you to accomplish something in a much simpler and easier way to think about? Well, let's find out. So over here, I have a simple application where basically I have an input over here and a counter, right? So if you can, as you can see over here, this counter uses an action called counter. So how it works is that whenever I click on this button, with the button with the action applied, when I click on it, the button will increment by once, and this number, which apparently, coincidentally, it's this number 1, right? So if you see that this number is bound by this input and is being passed into this action. So if I try to increment this to say 5, then whenever I click on it, it will increment by 5. So if I change it to 10, then increment by 10. Right? So this is so all this is the doing of the action, right? So your action over here, let's take a quick look at how this action is being defined. So this counter action itself defines a variable called count, and it will update the text, which is to set the button's inner HTML to be the count, the value of the count, right? And then it adds an event listeners. So whenever you click, it will increment the count and then update the text. Over here, it returns an object which has two methods. One is updates, which is to update whenever the increment is changed, you will update to that new increment. So this, if you remember in the last video, this is this parameter that we pass in. So we pass in this number, so that will be our increment. So whenever this change, this update function will be called, which means that your increment, the value of increments will update as well. And the destroy will remove the event listeners, right? So take a look again at this function. I mean, the behavior of this action isn't that complex, right? So it's like once you have this button, you probably would want to add an event listener, and then probably you keep the knowing that what is the value of the counter, and then probably with it you whenever you increment, you increment with a new number, right? So I probably want to do now is to rewrite this without actions, right? Because we are trying to answer like what if there's no action. So what would we have to write? So if we don't have an action, then probably we have other things that is available to us, right? We can use bind this to get the instance of the button, and we can use that to add event listeners, or we can also use on click the register for event listener, and then do the job, right? So what I'm trying to do now is instead use bind this to button. That I have a reason of doing this, but probably it will be more obvious later on, right? So if I use Okay, so here I'm gonna define a button variable. So whenever when this button is on the screen, it will make sure this variable will be updated with the reference of that button, right? Which means that over here when we have like on mount, we will have access to the instance of the button, right? So over here we can do the things that we have done over here, which is register an on-click listener on the button, and then we can return a function which is will be called when this component is being destroyed with this remove event listener, right? And we're going to define on click, which is over here. We can copy it over here. So on click will update the count. So we need to define count as well. We're going to define it here. And you're going to update text. So we need to define update text as well. So we're going to change this to button. And then lastly, we will import on mount, which is from Svelte. Right. And lastly, we also need to call update text to set the text to 1. So count is starting with 0. Right. So now we are not using this counter at all. Let me collapse this. This is not being used anywhere. And supposed to work. But let's see what is missing. Okay, increment is not defined. Oh, sorry. So we need to define a variable increment as well. Right. So increment should be equal to number. Okay, so now we need to update the value of increment, right? So increment is actually the value num over here. So probably we can maybe do something like this. Increment equals number, num, sorry. Now when we click, we can increment. When it updates, it works, right? So no big deal, right? You can achieve this without using action. So what's so cool about action, right? Well, how about this? Okay, so instead of having one button, we have two buttons, which both of them using counter, right? So I'm just use counter on both buttons. So let me comment out this first. Never mind. Let me keep this so that this button still works. So the first two button is the one that with actions. So right now, if I try to click on both, they increment independently, right? And when I change this, both of them increment independently. The count within this button is not the same as this, right? So how do you do that with how do you reuse this bind this button, right? Can you do that? Well, I mean, so probably we, instead of having one button variable, probably we need two button variables, and then probably we have to copy this over and then replace all of them as button 2, right? I guess that would work. So replace all of them as button 2. And then count, probably you need a count 2 for button 2. Right. On click has on click 2, update text 2. Well, let's see what else is missing. Count, increment, update text 2. No, update text 2 over here. Update text 2, update text 2. On click 2. This is 2. And I'm gonna have two buttons, right? What else is missing? Let's see. Button 2, counts 2. Okay, I think we are missing button 1. Not really. Oh, okay. So here, instead of returning, probably we have it on both sides, right? And yeah, we can do that as well. They're both incrementing independently, right? As you can see over here, probably we have to duplicate like the instance of the button in order to like try to replicate this. But if you're using actions, right, the element itself, the counts itself, they are all encapsulated within your action. So every time when you're using one actions, all these variables are locked in the scope of that action, and it's only available for your instance of this element. So you can call it multiple times you can apply this action on multiple times on multiple elements. Each of them will have their own scoped counts, update text, and everything else, right? So yeah, that is one thing that is a bit inconvenient if you're doing without action. But is that the deal breaker? Well, not. Let's see, right? So the next thing we're going to do here is that we're going to add a checkbox. So over here, I'm going to have an input called type checkbox. Let's say show. I'll wrap it with a label. Show buttons. And over here, I'm going to bind this checked with a variable called checked, which I'm going to define it over here. Let checked equals true. Right. And I'm going to say if checked, I'm going to show this. Right. If checked is true, then I'm going to show the buttons. If not, I'm going to hide the buttons. Show, and hide. Right. Immediately, you can see if I checked and unchecked a few times, because this is only being executed on mount. Therefore, as you can see here, once we recreate this button, because we create the button without inner content, the button is now without any content, right? So probably something we can change over here is to use on to use after updates instead. Right? Probably that would work. Not really. Right? So what happened? Right? So once you hide the buttons, so after update will be called every time when there is a new when there is an update, right? So when you show the buttons, you'll run after update. When you hide it, you'll run again. And when you run again, you are trying to execute this thing, right? Which is button 2 add event listener. And button 2 now is undefined because the button is removed from the DOM, right? So yeah, that is something that we probably will have to take note of, right? So we're going to say if button 2, only we add event listener, right? And if not, so which means that button 2 is hidden, then we are going to remove event listener for the button 2. Right. And same thing goes for button 1 and 2. Button 1, right? So over here, button. And as probably at this point of time, probably you might have already noticed, is that returning this previously during an on mount is not that accurate, right? Because this button is actually created and removed on change, which is right now when we are changing something, which means that if we hide this button, we should also remove event listener from the button. But if we are using it inside an on mount, it will only be called when the whole component is being removed. So if within this component is still here and you're just toggling, showing and hiding the button, well, it will not call this remove event listener. Right, so that is something that you might want to take note of. Probably you have already noticed, so can I remove this now? Okay, so show and hide. Right, same thing goes with the update text. Probably you can't call it right now. We're gonna call it only when the button 2 is available. Over here as well. Button 2, button 1. Right, show, hide. Hold on, remove elements of now. Okay, so now is something okay, so now button is actually undefined when you hide it, right? Which means that see, now we if the button is there, which means that we want to add an event listener, right? But when you hide it, which means that the button is right now is already undefined. So how do we remove event listener if we can't even get the instance of the button? Well, probably we can do something like assign the remove event listeners as let's see. Right, so probably we can still do it, but I think at this point you notice that it's not that easy anymore. While having, let me comment this, while having okay, let me collapse this and comment this as well. While having actions, everything still works pretty much the same. If I change this, they are still incremented individually. If I change this, they still works, right? Still works perfectly fine. Right, so let's see, should we continue on fixing this? I think we can still try a bit. So let's get back to just with one button. And with that one button, I am going to resurrect this part of the code. So probably, maybe let's don't do it with after updates. Maybe that's not the right, let's see whether it's the right way of doing it. Okay, so imagine we don't have this, right? Just without this, probably we can go away with a lot of things. Let's see, remove event listener. Update counts, button. Right? On click 2 is undefined. Okay. On click. Okay, so I think we can still get away with without remove event listener, but you know that it's not entirely exactly like the one with the actions, right? And now if we try to increment this, okay, so see that this is not quite working. Let's see what happened. Oh, I think my whole screen hang. Let's see what's going on. Probably it runs into some sort of infinite loop somewhere. Okay, I think I'm gonna give up and gonna, okay, refresh. Okay. What? It just come back. Let's try again. No, it died. So gonna give up on this one. Let's just refresh again and hope for the best. Well, as you can see over here, it's not that simple to do this without an action, right? So probably it's for the best that you have an action to help you achieve like something such simple as adding an event listener and exit page. having an event listener, and then increment whenever that this is incremented, right? So shall we just try one more time? This time around, let's do something different. Same thing goes. We're gonna have bind this with button. This time around, I'm probably trying to probe it in a different approach, which is to use reactive declaration. Right. So if button is, so this will execute when any time when. So if I'm using a button variable in here, which means that this whole statement will be executed anytime when this button variable change. So if button is available, then we are going to add event listener. Right, click and call on click. Right, on click, then we're gonna say buttons. Okay, so we also need a variable called count. So let's count equals to 0, and count should add plus num. And then we need to set the HTML of the button equals to count. Right, so now we also need to do the same thing over here. So now when we click, it will work. Right, as we increment this and we click again, it will continue to work. Then again, the deal breaker, which is what if we have a checkbox. Was it true initially? And I'm going to say, have new line over here, new line over here, input type checkbox. Bind checked. Also checked. Okay, so now I'm gonna have an if statement, if check. Hide this, show this. And I see whether I can still increment. Yep, it works. I increment this number, it still works. That's fine. Well, but actually not quite. So if I console log over here on click, gonna see it. Oh wait, yeah, it works, right? So okay, yeah, probably this works. Now probably we have to think about how we can remove event listener, which is over here. Let's say remove event listener when button is undefined, but then button, you don't have the reference of this button. So what we're gonna do is that we gonna use before. Okay, I'm gonna stop here because there's no straight easy way. If you have followed with me so far, you may realize that there's no straight easy way of doing it without going even more detail. So probably I feel like probably we have adding more logics over here, and I think we have achieved our goal so far is to demonstrate that what happens if you don't have an actions in Svelte. Probably you have to write all this codes just to achieve something where I think it's much easier to reason about and read about if you have an action. And so first thing is it's much harder to write this. Second is that it's you can easily reuse the same action over and over. If you without it, you probably would have to copy paste your code multiple times, having multiple reference of the same having multiple variables to reference to the different elements, right? So that's all for today. So if you like this video so far, give me a thumbs up. If you have anything that you feel that you think that you want me to improve on, comment down below. Any discussion is welcomed. And see you in the next video. Bye bye.